Okay, we're just 1 minute past our start time of 11:15, so we'll try and keep this rolling. I would just like to take this opportunity to again welcome everyone to the league meeting portion of our day. Again, I'll remind you that we are recording these sessions today just for our reference, so just so you're advised, it will be recorded. Baseball Alberta would like to thank you, our member associations, coaches, umpires, players, parents, and volunteers for the dedication to making our return to baseball a safe and enjoyable experience. Due to COVID-19 and for a period of time, that experience was in doubt, leaving uncertainty on what Albertans could gather at when we would gather at the baseball field again. After what seemed like a spring of never ending patience, ever changing rules, countless hours of work, we were pleased to once again be able to gather with our teammates and cheer on our loved ones as they played the game we all love. This year was like no other, in that it challenged our day to day choices and way of life. Going to work and school and attending a practice or game were no longer part of our routines. Social distancing and cohorts became common terms, and we discovered that not all sanitizers smelled good. Baseball Alberta Board of Directors and staff's focus will always be the health and safety of our athletes, coaches, officials, volunteers, and fans. We look forward to continuing to offer year round programming as we have in years past, and we'll continue to update our website and social media as things change. Also, you're able to contact us at any time via email or phone in the office. We are happy to speak to anyone with any questions as this ever changing day to day life that we're living right now is going on. So I guess just quickly, again, I introduced myself earlier. I'm Tam Rosno. I'm the new executive director with Baseball Alberta. So I came into the role right as unfortunately we stepped into what we now kind of know of as our COVID or our current pandemic. Our registration numbers were severely affected by this pandemic this year. We ended up having a total of 27 associations that registered players with us. Prior to April 1st, we did have 52 associations that had players registered, and we were looking forward to having many more join us. Total registration numbers did top out at 2149. Prior to April 1st, we were just under 7,000 and looking forward to more coming in. Our female player numbers, again, were looking really great at that April 1st as we were seeing 710 registrants, and we ended up for the 2020 season having 134 female athletes join us. Before I get to this slide, I just want to point out too, if anyone does have any questions on any of the slides, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And after we're completed on the slide, if there's any questions that have come in that haven't been answered or need to be addressed, I will get to those at the end of the slide. So just be patient, please. This next registration slide, just a quick snapshot of our registrations this past year as compared to the prior year as of April 1st and end of season. Typically, we would be able to give you guys some great graphs and some great snapshots of how many players we did have in relation to the year prior. Unfortunately, this year, it's more looking at what could have been. So you can see where our numbers were for some of our larger associations prior to April 1st, right on track with coming in quite close to the year before and likely would have met or exceeded where their registrations in 2019 were. Unfortunately, what we were ended up having come in were significantly less, as you can see in that far right column. Okay, no questions. So as you all know, or those of you that were able to participate in Baseball Alberta this past summer, we were able to offer programming with the cohort model that was put into place through Alberta Health Services and the government. So the cohorts, as many of you know, were groups of 50 or less, which included players, coaches, as well as umpires assigned to the cohort. So prior to the season being off and running, we did have AAA teams registered with us, looking forward to what we had thought was going to be a normal season. So you can see the top bit there captures our 13U category looking quite the same. Our 15U, I'm sure we would have hit 15, we hit 15, it was 14 prior. And our 18U, we had 15 already looking to play in the league. What we ended up having and able to offer was a combination of the single A, double A, and triple A. Some associations were able to establish teams at each of these levels. Some associations had primarily double A, and some associations ended up making a mix for their teams. So their cohort groups ended up working rather than having individual teams at each of those levels. Their registration numbers dictated that teams had to be combined in order to offer a playing opportunity for as many baseball players as they could. So the breakdown of the cohorts that we saw this year, once we were able to effectively get on the field to offer play as of July 15th, at the 11U, we had 7 cohorts. This was made up of 17 different teams. So depending on the amount of players registered, amount of coaches on each team, and then adding the umpires into the cohort, we saw cohort numbers anywhere from 2 to 4 teams per cohort. It just really depended on the registration numbers. So the 11U, 7 cohorts with 17 teams. 13U, we ended up with the same, 7 cohorts with 17 teams. The same at 15U. And then at 18U, we had 4 cohorts and we had a total of 9 teams. It is worth noting that we had some teams that unfortunately we were unable to place into a cohort. What ended up happening is due to the travel restrictions that were in place at the beginning of play, limited us to who we could group together in order to abide by those restrictions. So unfortunately, we saw Barhead, Bonnyville's 18U team, Castor, Clive, Drumheller, the Calgary Moose, as well as the East Central Bulls, being unable to be cohorted due to the travel restrictions. Or in some cases, we didn't have the appropriate age category or skill level of team to group them with according to the cohort application that we had teams fill out prior to being placed into the cohorts. So down the right-hand side, you'll see all the associations that we were able to place successfully into cohorts for play. So Sherwood Park, Parkland, Nez, South Jasper Place, Beaumont, Leduc, Seba, Bonnyville, Fort McMurray, Camrose, Eba, Sylvan Lake, Central Alberta Hounds, St. Paul, and Devon. The ones that are marked with the asterisk there only participated in fall ball, and some of the ones that are listed here participated in the summer season as well as fall ball. Next up, we ran our fall ball, which, like everything else this year, looked different in terms of when we started, when we finished, and then again using that cohort model. So you'll see we did have teams at each of the age categories. Lower participation again in the amount of teams compared to previous years, but really great that we were able to play as long as we did, and we were able to actually extend the fall ball season for a number of these cohorts because of the great weather we actually ended up having into October. So that was one positive that we were really pleased to see. This next slide, probably why most of you are here. And this is going to kind of dive into things we are trying to consider for next year. So we're closely monitoring all the current government of Alberta and AHS measures that are in place. As we've all seen over the last 8 months, these measures can change at any moment. And as such, we have 3 possible scenarios for the 2021 season. Each scenario will be played with regular rules or as close to regular rules as permitted by AHS. So that will be reevaluated prior to the season and communicated. So we saw some changes this year with our play and our rules just based on the restrictions when we began play. We just like everyone to keep in mind that at this time, these are simply possibilities. We have to be prepared for them, and we are in no way able to predict what will be permitted in the coming months. We're also not limiting ourselves to just these scenarios. So as things continue to change, as opportunities come available, as winter sports hopefully get back to being able to play, we may learn some things and see some things of how other sports are managing and moving forward that we might be able to use and put into play. So in scenario 1, because we do have to look at all possibilities, we do have what would be or could be a season similar to 2020. A cohort application process would be in place. At this time, we are still sitting with 50 as the cohort number. So that is what we have laid out, and it obviously is subject to change. And it's worth noting that the cohort limit no longer includes coaches, officials, and staff. So there is further AHS requirements for those individuals, such as masks and maintaining the 2-meter space as a way to not be included in that 50 cohort. Obviously, if you're not wearing a mask and you are within the 2 meters, then you would be considered within the cohort number with your team. So that would affect that number. But that is a change from last year. There was different guidance at the point when we started last year. Scenario 2, when we get to the next few slides, you'll actually see we have a kind of a part A and part B. But the cohort limit of 50 subject to change would still be in place, and you would be placed into your cohorts for a set number of play weekends. Following each set of play weekends, teams will have a 2-week break where they will be limited to activities strictly within your team. So the 2-week break, the 14 days, is mandated currently by the province and by AHS is what needs to happen if you are working with a model where within one cohort and planning to change to another with different groups of individuals. So the newly formed cohorts would continue following the 2-week break for another set of play weekends. And scenario 3, similar to 2019, if we can all remember that far back, we would have regular entry, late entry, tiering. We'd hopefully have provincial championships. Schedules would be created with the teams having the ability to play each other without cohort restrictions. There would be a potential to attend post-provincial championships. That part of the equation is not dependent on us. That's dependent on Baseball Canada. But if we were more similar to 2019, we would expect being able to have that available to us. So scenario 1, this again would be a time where we would normally just be able to pop up just a start weekend and have all the dates for you. So slides look a little different here, these next few coming up. But for scenario 1, we see a start date for the season of May 8th, ending the season on August 22nd. Again, taking into consideration, we wouldn't have provincials, we'd be limited to the cohorts, so we would extend the play as long as possible. And this would allow for a 2-week break prior to the start of fall ball. So hopefully we'd have good weather and kids would be able to continue playing even longer. Scheduling in this scenario will be done by Baseball Alberta to ensure a desired number of games are being played by all teams. However, individual teams will be able to schedule extra games within their cohort. Baseball Alberta will assign umpires to the scheduled games, and provincial championships would not be possible with the cohort restrictions and tournament formats not being permitted. So again, keeping in mind, this would be more similar to what we saw last year. Some changes that we would have would be the assisting with the scheduling, just to ensure that all the cohorts are getting that desired number of games. There was, some different amounts of games that were played that were able to be played by different cohorts with the feedback we had from this past year. So we wanted to make sure that we were assisting as best we can. Okay, next. So scenario 2A. This scenario would have teams placed into the cohorts for 2 weekends of play, so that's set number of weekends, before being required to take a mandatory 14-day break, and then being placed into a new cohort. This scenario would allow teams to play against a greater number of teams over the course of the summer. And Baseball Alberta will schedule a minimum number of games to be played within each cohort, and Baseball Alberta will assign umpires to the scheduled games. So again, we'd have the start date of May 8th, and that first cohort going for the 2 weeks. And how it's laid out here in the black text, we have when the cohorts would be running, and in the red is showcasing when there would be a break from cohort play. So you can see that second cohort would begin play on June 8th, playing to the 20th. Then we'd have that mandatory break. The re-cohort into the third cohort group would begin on July 6th to the 18th, then the required break on the 19th to August 2nd. And then that final cohort would begin August 2nd to August 3rd to August 22nd. There would be an additional week of play in the final cohort in this scenario. So that last grouping would allow for an additional week, but again, still stopping August 22nd for that 2-week break in order to be able to start fall ball on time so that teams would be able to continue playing. I do see we have a question regarding this slide here. So from Stephen Hawks from Wetaskiwin. Thanks, Stephen. Our slide's going to be distributed to all Baseball Alberta associations. Yeah, what we'll do is we will make the scenarios and everything available through the website, likely through download. So that will be Monday. We'll have everything available up on there for you. Okay, we can go to the next slide. You're welcome, Stephen. So 2B. So this scenario would have teams placed in their cohorts for 3 weeks of play. So that set weekends of play would be 1 additional week before being required to take a mandatory 14-day break and being placed into the new cohort. So Baseball Alberta will schedule a minimum number of games to be played within each cohort, and Baseball Alberta will assign umpires to the scheduled games. So again, you're going to see those schedules. The breakdown of the schedule. The black text would be the play weekends within the cohorts, and then the red again would be that break away. So you'll see there's less breaks there because you're getting the additional week of play in each cohort. So again, less variety of teams that you'd be seeing, but you'd be playing for a longer period of time in your set amount of playing. Okay, so again, ending the 22nd, same thing, trying to have that same end date to allow for the 14-day period before fall ball would begin. Looks like Dave Ball from Nez has a question. Would AA and AAA play on opposite weekends to utilize field use? So that's something we've been discussing here in the office, is how exactly we'd be able to allow for each one of the categories, the play categories, to continue play. And we feel that we would be able to have the opposite weekend of play where possible. And just also noting that it will look different in different associations and different municipalities based on the availability that we have. So obviously there'll be things throughout that as we get closer and kind of have a better idea of what we'll be working with, we'll be able to give more concrete. But yeah, we're hoping to be able to work within that. Okay, fingers crossed, scenario 3. What we would see here is just a typical season, what we would be used to. And what we're all hoping and praying for. So this would be our designated weekends that we have out for the 11U, 15U for AA. This is what we're looking at. So I won't go through everything with you because I'm sure some of you are screenshotting or taking pictures right now as per usual. But again, it has weekends of play, it has tiering, it has provincial championships, it has everything that we would have normally seen. So this would be our 11U and 15U AA weekends of play. And hang on here, just have a question coming in on this slide from Rich Yerko. Hi, Rich. Would you consider limiting rosters to 16 players at the 18U level to ensure you could have a 3-team cohort instead of only playing 1 team all the time if COVID was still around? Yes, this is something we have spoken about, and I don't know if I've talked to you about it already, but I have talked to a number of people. We do recognize that the limit of the amount of people within a cohort did cause a bit of limitations for us last year in terms of how many teams we could place into a cohort. So we would look to that. At this point, again, it's nothing that we've made a set determination on, but I think moving to something like a 16-player roster and looking what we'd be able to work with, that would likely be best. And it is something we have discussed and have in our considerations to having limits for roster sizes. The one benefit this year is that the coaches aren't included in the number, and the umpires. So as long as our coaches, again, as I mentioned previously, are maintaining that 2-meter distance and wearing masks, then as per the AHS guidelines, they would not be included in that cohort number, which really, really helps. Okay, moving on. Another question here. Not knowing what the rules will be like next year, would you consider developing a plan around a 12-day break from cohorts would allow for additional weekends of play? So this would be something that we would have to apply to the government for. So anything outside of the 14 days, as stated. So I do know universities, the ACAC, have applied for a shorter break and have gone to, not bubble, but some extra, I guess, ex- ex- exceptions to try and allow for less. So it's not, definitely not out of the question. Okay, and yes, AJHL, I believe is what you're referring to. So very, very different, but they're classified differently. But yes, I mean, it would be something we can look at for sure. As of right now, I'd say we're keeping within the guidance as it's laid out from the government and from AHS. Okay, we'll move to the next slide. And this one, just scenario 3 here now, just for the different age group here. So for the 13U and 18U AA. So again, very similar to the previous slide for the other age category. We'd be looking at beginning play again on the 8th and having the optional play weekends in there for the 18Us, which was a change that we had looked at previously in 2019. And then obviously the provincial championships on here laid out just like on the previous slide in again, as normal as possible, more looking like 2019 and before. Another 1 second, just one more question here. Another option is to have buddy teams that can stay cohorted together consecutively, and then they could play each other on the off weekend. So Rob, I love ideas, and I love, everyone trying to think how things can work. And the issue is that if there's a cohort that's already established, because I'm not sure what there's a cohort and now there's a buddy team. Your cohort is your cohort number. So I don't know where your buddy team would be coming from. They can stay cohorted together consecutively, and then they could play each other on the off weekend. The only way that would work is if the cohort itself is not at the 50 capacity, because then that other team would then be upping that number. So once you're in the 50, you have to break before any part of that 50 joins with a new team. And as well, if that buddy team is cohorted elsewhere and playing elsewhere, then they would be exposed to other players and other numbers. So again, we're not limiting ourselves to scenarios and considerations, and things will continue to change. But just understanding how the cohort system works, we have to respect that. Okay, as we kind of noted on the last two screens, provincial weekends. In scenario 3, we would be able to have provincials. So we'd be looking at the 15U AAA Tier 2 running July 16th to 18th, 18U AAA both tiers, as well as the 13U AAA Tier 2 provincials would be held that following weekend, July 23rd to 25th. The 15U AAA and 13U AAA Tier 1 provincial championships would be held July 30th to August 1st. And then we would also be able to offer our A-League provincials in July, which is when we would typically run that, beginning July 3rd for the 2 weeks before their provincial championship weekend on July 16th to 18th. This next slide here is just a bit of background as to why the dates on the previous slide are the way they are. So again, if it's a normal year and everything that's supposed to run is going to run, the 15U AAA Tier 2 provincials are scheduled tentatively from July 16th to 18th due to the Alberta Summer Games taking place that following weekend. So if this event is canceled, the Tier 2 provincials would or could take place the following weekend as per usual. Again, we're not limiting ourselves to the scenarios, but this is kind of what we can do with what we have right now. The 18U 18U AAA Tier 1 and Tier 2 provincials are scheduled to take place on the same weekend in order to allow for more training opportunities for the Canada Cup team, which was something that was decided last year. So if Canada Cup is canceled, Tier 1 provincials would take place the following weekend. There are many changes to these scenarios depending on the number of teams in the league and the potential league structure changes. Currently, right now, as it stands, this would be the dates and locations for the national hosts in Alberta. So we have the Ray Carter Cup being hosted by Okotoks. We have the 18U Championships being hosted by Fort McMurray, and the Men's Championship is being hosted in Red Deer. The Westerns hosts, we have the 15U AAA host, it would be Nez, and the AA minor championships, Westerns, would be hosted in Provost. So these were previous hosts that now we would hopefully be able to have hosting in 2021.